so much for coming out tonight. For the viewers, can you state your name and which riding you're from?
I'll start. I'm Ken Hardie. I'm from the riding of Fleetwood-Port Kells. I'm the Liberal candidate there.
And I'm John Aldag. I'm the Liberal candidate in Cloverdale-Langley City.
Sorry to cut you off. So I just want to talk a little bit about the campaign we're doing. We're doing a campaign called Vote the Vote with the Canadian Alliance Student Association. So far, we've collected in our campus over 1,800 pledges. We're hoping to collect more, just to encourage students to vote. Right now, we're actually the largest voting bloc in Canada. So I will begin with several of the questions. I believe I gave you the questions. Okay, so let's start with the first one. I'll ask both of you. Why did you folks run for office?
I was going to say because there was a mob in hot pursuit, but no, I ran for office basically because I didn't, in 2015, like the vision that the Conservatives had for Canada. I thought that they had mismanaged a number of things. They've been, not terribly forthcoming and not terribly effective. Their policies tended to really benefit the well-to-do and left the people who needed a hand up behind. So I felt that there was a better way. Since 1969, when I joined the Liberal Party of Canada, I felt that an activist government is what this country needs, and it was a real charge to get in there, run, win, and serve.
And for myself, my career prior to politics, I worked over 3 decades with the Parks Canada, the National Park Service, in both national parks and national historic sites. In 2012, I was the acting superintendent at Pacific Rim National Park Reserve over in the Fleetwood-Port area. And that year was the year that the Conservative government took really drastic cuts to the public service. One of the things I had to do was lay off my scientists. And that was my political awakening. I thought, this is wrong. It is being driven by values that I did not hold. It was about moving away from evidence-based decision making, and I was really concerned. In my case, I went home to my wife. I was still years away from retirement, and I said to her, I don't think I continue working under this government. And she said, wise as she is, that I could either do something about it or suck it up and do nothing and not complain about it until I retired. And so in my case, I thought, I need to do something about it. I thought originally I would work on somebody else's campaign and just kind of help out. As I had conversations, I realized that there were a lot of other things were off the rails as well, from how we were dealing with the narrative related to immigration, to overall environmental issues, to economic policies. And I really thought that I needed to be a voice, and ultimately I ended up being on the ballot, and in 2015 was elected as a member of Parliament for Cloverdale-Langley City, and that was really the driving force behind me getting involved in politics.
Thank you. All right, on to the next question. What will your party do to make post-secondary more affordable for students?
There's a couple of really interesting things that we've done, and Ken and I can share this, but increasing grants for students by $1,200 per year. We feel that there is definitely a squeeze. There are also some really, I think, great policies about not having students have to pay back their student loans or start paying them back until 2 years after they graduate, so that they can start getting a toehold into the job market, get that first post-degree job and start getting established. There's also pieces in our platform that will allow students to pause payments on their student loans should they have them, including things like having a family. And so until a child in a household gets beyond 5 years of age, student loans can be put into a hold status. And if a student's income falls below $35,000, or until they reach $35,000, they won't have to make payments on their student loans. And that way we can really help students deal with one of those big issues we hear, and I think it's later in the interview as well, affordability. And so it's having students get their education, give them the support, but not have to worry about the payment until they're a bit more established in their careers than we see under the program right now.
And to add to that, I think that the trades are an area where basically Canada needs more electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters, etc. And our government has worked, especially with organized labor. I had the opportunity to present a rather large contribution to the acquisition of new training equipment for the sheet metal workers to allow their students to virtually learn how to weld. which is really kind of important in sheet metal work. So the trades, the benefits and the assistance that we're giving to people, looking out for their Red Seal certification, that's all good. But the key thing that really sort of rises above everything else is that we have set the table for an economy that provides good jobs for people when they do get their training or they get their academic credentials. We've grown our economy by an average of 3% a year, the best in the G7. The economy itself has created 1 million new jobs, and we have the lowest unemployment rate since they started measuring our unemployment rate. So when you look at that, you can see that the kids coming out of school, and some of them aren't kids, some of them are in, for retraining, etc. They have so many more opportunities out there to make a good life for themselves and their families. But that's part of the mix of the support that we give to students.
All right, moving on to the next question. A little bit similar, but what do you two think are the biggest issues facing students today?
The issue that I hear all the time is just affordability. It's the overall cost of living and how to survive. So it's everything from having access to affordable and appropriate housing for students. It's about transit. That's something that Ken and I hear a lot about in Fleetwood-Port Kells and Cloverdale-Langley City. And our government is committed to both of those, to help with housing and rental housing, as well as other forms of home ownership. We've committed a significant amount of money, $1.3 billion for transit improvements south of the Fraser, and our platform includes a $3 billion ongoing commitment to transit for municipalities. And in Surrey, we need about I think there's $350 million a year in order to realize TransLink's 10-year plan, and so that will get SkyTrain to Langley. And it's great to have students being able to move campuses in a much more efficient way than they do now.
Right. And I spent 13 years as head of communication at TransLink, so I'm quite well aware of things like the UPass and how valuable that is to students. But I think that there's another thing, and it's an issue for which we don't have a solution yet, and that's basically access to education. There's a continual stress between foreign students coming in, and the perception is that they're taking up spaces that our local students can't access. I'm told by a lot of the universities that that's not the case, but the perception is certainly there. And I think that we need to have a closer look at funding for education, even though it's a provincial matter. We can do for education like we've started to do with healthcare, and that is provide federal funding, but with strings attached, to make sure that certain things are being offered to students that will actually benefit not only the students, but the economy generally.
Moving on to the next question. What would your party do to address some of the concerns that international students are facing?
Well, I'll start with that one. I think that, we have such a great opportunity with our international students in that they come here, they gain experience in the North American setting, and one of two things happens. They either stay, they become citizens, and they contribute to our economy, and in that way we're attracting some of the best and the brightest from around the world. Or they go back home, and they don't just go back with an education that they've got, they've obtained here. They go back with a sense as to how we run a very interesting country, and the influence that they can have back home with the experience that they have here can be very transformative if you look at, international democracy and all the rest of it. But certainly, when the international students come here, they pay a lot for their education. They seem prepared to do it. I think part of the difficulties that we hear expressed to us are the relatively small number who don't necessarily play by the rules, and they make the conditions difficult for the ones who do. So there are immigration issues, etc., that we really have to take a closer look at to ensure that when an international student comes here, first of all, they get the education and the experience they're looking for. They're not taken advantage of in any way, shape, or form, but they also live up to their side of the bargain for being here.
Yeah, Ken, you've done a great job covering many of the things I hear about international students. One issue that I also hear is simply having appropriate housing for them. and we have such a housing shortage, and a lot of the international students are being squeezed to come to Canada and to study here, and then housing as well. So I think we need to pay attention to students, make sure that their rights are being protected, that there's a pathway to citizenship should they so choose to stay, because invested in them, and it's a great way to have them join the economy and help grow our economy.
Exactly. If elected, what would your party do for mental health resources?
Well, I'll start with that one again. We've already taken steps. In fact, after the last election, we made $11 billion available to the province. And this is what I was alluding to with the answer to the previous question, because when we made that money available to the provinces, with healthcare being a provincial mandate, we did put strings attached to it. It had to be used for mental health services. And that money should be available and working in BC's system, Alberta's system, every province that's agreed to sign on to receive their share of that funding. We know there is more that needs to be done, and it's one of those things where we'll look at the efficacy of the investments we've made so far to see what else needs to be done, where the gaps exist. And then obviously the dialogue, the conversation goes on all the time, right? How can we make things better? And that's something that we're not going to be hung up on philosophical issues like, oh, we've got to balance the budget, so therefore people have to do without. No. We're not afraid to invest in the country, to give the country what it needs, because we know the payback is so great.
Yeah, so we do have very clear commitments to improving mental health services in Canada in this platform. And that's why I think it's just one of many pieces of our platform that take Canada in the direction we need to go.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Can you talk a little about what your party's plan is to tackle climate change?
Perhaps I'll start with this one, Ken. I had the chance to sit on the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee for the last 4 years in Ottawa, and I chaired the committee for the final year. And our committee in the last year made several recommendations on how to address climate change, which the government has actually adopted and in many cases reflected in this platform. So I think that we have the best and most viable plan for tackling climate change of any of the parties right now involved in this election. There are a few things. One of the ones that I'm really excited about is the commitment to have a net carbon zero economy in Canada by 2050. And with that, we're willing to go where we will make legislated targets in 5-year increments. And so it's a level of accountability that we've never seen in Canada to actually move us to a point where we're either reducing our carbon emissions to zero or sequestering an equivalent amount to what we're releasing. So that's one of the first things, that legislative framework, which has never been done in Canada before. With that, there's a whole number of issues. We've run out of time this evening if we go into all of them, but I really would encourage people to have a look at that platform. It's everything from dealing with emissions through home ownership. Private buildings contribute a significant amount of emissions, and so we have $40,000 loans that homeowners can get to do energy retrofits. We have money for entrepreneurs and businesses. We'll cut the taxes by 50% so that they can reinvest that money into the innovation and technology that's needed to deal with climate change. We're committed to planting 2 billion trees in the coming years, which will help with that sequestration of carbon. Ken, I'll give you a chance to talk about some of the other things, because there's so much in this platform that's really exciting.
Well, I think that the heaviest lifting that we have to do is, I'll be frank, is to counter the misinformation and the outright falsehoods being spun by the Conservative Party of Canada about putting a price on pollution. They say that it's a tax on everything, that it'll kill employment, that it will raise the price of all of the things that we buy. British Columbia proved them wrong 9-10 years ago. Well, we've had a price on pollution in this province since 2008-2009. In that time, our per capita emissions in BC have gone down 14%. Our economy has grown by 26%. But more importantly, because that old socialist Gordon Campbell took the money that was generated by that base amount and he used it to reduce your income taxes. So guess what? We pay the lowest income tax rates in the country. The Conservatives don't want anybody to believe that. And they lie. I'm sorry, there's no better way of putting it. Not only are they contradicting Nobel Prize-winning economists that say putting a price on pollution is the way to go, they're even contradicting the godfather of this party, Preston Manning, who also believes in putting a price on carbon. Because you put a price on something that you want to see less of, you offer an incentive by returning the money. 9 out of 10 Canadian families are doing, actually they're getting more back than they're spending at the pump. So this, I mean, the Conservatives should be taken criminally for the way they're spinning this, because it is absolute BS. That's a technical term.
And that's why I say we are the only party with a viable plan that will get us to where we need to.
Okay, on to the next question. Do you or your party intend to increase transfers to the provinces for post-secondary education?
Quick answer, I don't know. I don't know. But we were talking a little bit earlier about identifying gaps, things that need to be done where there's a value add and a payback. And obviously, as we identify those, that puts people like John and I in the position of going to the federal government in caucus and through the ministries and through things like the standing committees to push for exactly that. So the way it would work is simply this. People like you raise it. Hey, we need this. Okay? We go back and we go to the standing committee that's got a piece of this and we say, do a study, call in the witnesses, let's find out what's actually going on and what our options look like. That turns into a report with recommendation that goes to Parliament, and that puts us on a track to real change, which we have demonstrated time and time and time again.
On this issue, I would say that although we don't have a specific commitment in the platform at this point to increase transfers to provinces for post-secondary, when I look at what we did over the last 4 years, we actually supported universities through both infrastructure, significant investments to help universities deal with the neglect and the expansions that were needed that they didn't get over the last 10 years. We also invested in research quite significantly, and I see no indication that we won't continue to support post-secondary institutions in that manner should we form government after October 21st.
Thank you for that answer. What is your, sorry, I believe I skipped a question. Have I asked the housing question yet? Sorry, my apologies. What do you intend to do to address housing issues such as affordability that students face?
There are a couple of things that I'll start off with. One, we developed the National Housing Strategy, which is the first time the federal government's been involved in discussions since the 1970s about housing in Canada. And out of that, there are several programs. We have a really aggressive program to work with developers and municipalities to develop things like affordable rental housing, which we have not seen. There is an absolute shortage of rental housing within the Lower Mainland. There are options for programs of cooperative housing and cooperative housing improvements. We've introduced the first-time home buyers incentive, which will help a lot of students, if not when they're students, shortly after entering their careers, being able to get into the housing market. And the government will take a small stake in the mortgage, and that actually reduces mortgage payments by hundreds of dollars per month, which helps with kind of overall affordability too. So I think that there are several things in our platform that will help with the affordability question for students related to housing.
Actually, one of the first things we did when we came into power in 2015 is we renewed a lot of the co-op agreements to make sure that those subsidies were there for people in co-op housing. But we also know that there hasn't been much new stock built in, well, quite a long time actually. So what we have done is invested in the maintenance and repair and upkeep of the existing stock. And as John mentioned, the National Housing Strategy will add to that stock. But, you know, the whole issue that runs underneath this, things like money laundering, things like foreign ownership and cold beds where somebody owns a house and nobody lives in it. This is the sort of thing that we can unleash an awful lot of capacity in our market by just dealing with that. And that is part of the platform that we've put out.
Okay, the next question. What is your party's or your plan to improve transit to make it more affordable and accessible for students?
Well, let the transit guy start with this one.
That's exactly.
And certainly, you know, the fact that we have put, better part of $2 billion into rapid transit expansion here in Metro Vancouver is a really good start. It's not known that a portion of the tax that you pay at the pump comes back to Metro Vancouver through the province and the Union of BC Municipalities. It goes to TransLink for state of good repair, for expanding or replacing services, etc., you know, replacing buses. It amounts right now to $180 million a year. But this year, we doubled it. So in fact, TransLink has been the recipient of $360 million, which it is using to upgrade SkyTrain cars, etc. Now, obviously, the new rapid transit line through our riding in Fleetwood will have a ripple effect right across Surrey, because when you put in rapid transit, you free up buses that used to run that route. And those buses are going to add to the services right across Surrey, so it'll be a lift for everybody.
Last question. Will your party separate grants for students with disability needs from student loans? Continuing to keep this trend together creates barriers for students with disabilities who have exhausted student loans or do not qualify for student loans.
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that one specifically. It's a very good question, and as Ken mentioned, these are the types of issues we've met with student union groups from across Canada before on when they have lobby days in the Hill and at home. These are the types of issues that are really important to hear about, so that we can try to advocate for these types of changes to programs. We do have commitments as far as accessibility within our platform, and there are persons with disabilities, not just students, but including students who are not able to have jobs because of physical and other barriers. And so there are programs to help employers make their workspaces more accessible. So if you have students who want to work but are now currently limited because of a disability, there are programs that will help in that kind of area. And that's one of the really concrete things we're committed to for persons with disabilities in our platform.
Yeah, I think John has pretty much covered it. It is the sort of thing that, I certainly, it hasn't been in my bandwidth in time, because I've been on Fisheries and Oceans and the Transport Committee. So that's not the sort of issue that I would have covered in the past. But I think the key thing is that your individual MP, your local MP, is supposed to be the person that you can go to with an idea. And the MP should listen very objectively and figure out how to move that idea up the ladder so that maybe a real change can happen. This is the sort of thing that John and I have really dedicated. We've sunk roots deep into our ridings by doing exactly that. And in fact, well, of course, all the South Fraser has been painted red since the last election, and it's the sort of thing that, Randeep Sarai does, Sue Dhaliwal does, Gordy Hogue does. This is what we do, and this is what we will continue to do when we're all back after October 21st.
All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for organizing this evening and for collecting so many pledges. Students get out there and vote students and vote Liberal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.